Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. Following on from the previous video, I did a pinned comment on that video, and that was, and this is, a nutrient type video. So those of you who don't like that sort of thing, there's some funny pets videos on YouTube you can watch, or there's probably some grass growing somewhere that you can watch, or some paint drying. There are always alternatives, but for those of you who are interested in that sort of thing, this is like a follow-on. And I was basically talking about, you know, the fertilizer analysis never adds up to 100%. It's always less than that, if you see what I mean. But nonetheless, it's a percentage of 100%. Yeah? So, let's have a look at my MSU fertilizer, which I'm quite happy with. I'm not messing about with that or criticising it or anything like that. I'm happy with this stuff. And I'm happy with the science that went into developing it and the experiments that were done. But out of 100% of this orchid fertiliser, 13% is nitrogen, irrespective of what else is in it. That's stated on the tin. As I said, do what it says on the tin. But a lot of discussion is out there on basic strengths of feed for orchids, and a lot of the discussions are based on the nitrogen element. So there's an assumption that all the other elements are in that fertilizer in a balanced form. Now obviously that balance can need altering depending on environmentals, vigour of the plant, time of year. No, forget all that for now. We'll just stick with a good balanced feed. So if I had a TDS reading of 200, assuming that the non-food element still contributes to that TDS reading, you can still relatively safely say that with a TDS reading of 200, there's about 26% nitrogen. So effectively 26 parts per million out of a TDS reading of 200 is the nitrogen element. So let's benchmark that, say 25, makes it easier, yeah? So out of my TDS reading of 200, 25 parts per million would be deemed a rough value of the nitrogen element contained in it. But I then decided to move on and find out some recommendations for parts per million of nitrogen. And if you do a search on that type of thing, 9 times out of 10 you'll find First Ray's site, and his current information is based on his latest fertiliser, which is not MSU like it once was when I bought mine, but on something called K-Lite or something or other. And when you look at the analysis of that, the NPK values are 12, 1 and 1. Which in my book is laughable. Pause for thought. Go and ask Rick about what he thinks of 1% K in a fertiliser for orchids. And he'll probably do what I've just done, laugh at you. So, bearing in mind that's part of a feeding regime, that rain's getting heavy, I'm job doing myself think here. Given that that's part of a feeding regime that does involve other ingredients on a regular basis, maybe it's not as bad as it sounds. But that's one of the things that came up. Moving on, we found articles from St. Augustine Orchid Society. Some flipping good articles come up on there, backed up by some, you know, good stuff. Also American Orchid Society. Well, can we rely on the information from them? Probably. Yeah? So I've now got 2 reasonable sources, and on various orchid boards I found other conversations that back this up. And basically the lower levels of parts per million recommended for orchids start at about 50 up to about 100. In some articles you'll find it going up as high as 150. Don't forget, this is just the nitrogen element. Well, that sounds too high for me. Maybe on vigorous, actively growing plants in an ideal world with a perfect environment and everything just right, maybe that's true. It still sounds a bit high for me. So coming back to the fact that I'm in the winter at the moment, the lower end of all of those collective arguments put together, not just one, many, come together at 50 parts per million of nitrogen being okay when things are not in full active growth, like the winter time. Yeah? Now do the maths. What I just said was if I was feeding at 200 parts per million with my MSU, only about 25 parts per million are nitrogen. And the lower level of all of those other people's analysis is 50 parts per million of nitrogen. But don't forget, you've got to base some people only feed once every 2 weeks and then flush in between quite a few times. So that's like the I haven't eaten for 3 days and I'm going to have a 10-course meal to make up for it. Does that sound like a reasonable way to eat? It doesn't to me. So I'll always step back from that idea and say that a little often is a better way. So coming right down the bottom end, 50 parts per million of nitrogen, if you've already done the maths in your head, does not come out at a TDS reading of 200, it comes out at a TDS reading of 400. Twice my maximum level. So it still comes back to the fact that the more evidence I get, the more it comes down to the fact I think I'm underfeeding. Now, I'm not stonking up my feed levels, my TDS readings at this time of year. I've got cold temperatures. I've got, you know, I mean, it's the middle of the day at the moment. It's like darkness in here. There's so little light around. I know I've got the lights on, but, you know, it's not the same. Not the same as having a nice sunny day coming in through the glass. So I'm going to increase my feed level a bit for the orchids that are growing. Now I've got resting dendrobiums, they don't get any feed at all. You see what I mean? There's always variables. But my Tolumnias are still growing. My Cattleyas are still, in some cases, pushing up new growths. Quite a few of my Oncidiums have, you know, I mean, there's one I can just see out the corner of my eye, has got a stonking new growth coming up on it. But I need some food, you know. So, yeah. I've got new growths coming out in quite a few places on quite a few plants. Some of my plants are actively growing, although slower than they would do in the height of the growing season. So I'm going to up my feed levels based on everything I've found out today because I'm bored. I can't go out because it's pouring with rain. I didn't have hardly anything to water today, so I'm bored. So I've been fiddling around on the computer, and that's what I've come up with. I'm capable of doing those sorts of searches, and quite honestly, so is everybody else. So I'm not listing all the articles that I've found, with too many for a start. They're there if you want to go and find them and have a read. But I'm feeding too low. Now, the feed level that I just said, you know, around 25 parts per million of nitrogen, that might even be a bit high for Masdevallias. Bearing in mind they don't get fed every time. No way. They get a little bit now and again as opposed to a little bit often. So you've still got to bear in mind the types of orchids, the vigour of those orchids, your environmentals, temperatures, light, day lengths, and the time of year relative to what the plant is up to. Yeah? Some plants spend some time doing next to nothing, and others grow continuously, given the right environmental variables, of course. So some food for thought there, but and all that is based on a TDS reading from my mixed up MSU fertiliser, assuming that the packing, the filler, the unidentified stuff in there affects the TDS meter the same as the good stuff in there. I hope that's true, yeah? Because bearing in mind when fertilisers are put together, those percentages can sometimes be by volume and they can sometimes be by weight. And sometimes it's a combination of the two, but they probably won't tell you. You know, they're just giving you a percentage. And as such, it's a good guideline. I doubt if it's 100% accurate. So, yeah, I'm underfeeding, bottom line. See you next time. Bye for now.